Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lions Den Podcast, Episode 1. I am your host, David Kendrick Jr., your favorite Purple Heart veteran, mental health advocate, and keynote speaker. Let's get into a little bit about me. I am from Rochester, New York, and if you don't know where that part of the country is, it is between Buffalo and Syracuse. A lot of people ask me, what part of New York City is that? And then I tell them I'm from Rochester, and they go, oh, that's not New York. But it is. We have a lot of Buffalo Bills fans up there. Very special shout out to our MVP, Josh Allen. It is Monday night, and my Buffalo Bills are actually here in Atlanta for Monday Night Football. We're going to smoke the Falcons, and we have a lot of Buffalo Bills fans in Atlanta right now. So, it's always fun to see a Buffalo Bills fan and say, go Bills. All right. In the intro, you heard that dun 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 charge. Because the cavalry is here. I am a 19 Delta Cavalry Scout. I served in the Army for 5 years. From 2005 to 2010, I deployed out of Fort Carson, Colorado with the 361st Cavalry Regiment. And if you want to hear more about that, my friends, my family, I did also write a book. I'm an author as well. I wrote a book called Cavalry that I self-published, and you can find that on Amazon. Now, let's get into what the Lions Den podcast is going to be about. I am a keynote speaker. I'm a mental health advocate. I speak professionally about things that people aren't really comfortable speaking about in their personal lives. That's why you see the Lion here in Lion Speaking Agency. My speaking career actually started when I got into this program called the Warrior Salute program out of Webster, New York. When I got home, I served in the Army 5 years. I got shot by a sniper when I deployed in 2007. And when I got home, something was a little bit off. And I got accepted into this program to help veterans get back on their feet called the Warrior Salute program. And in this program, there were other veterans just like myself. Not as handsome as me, but there were other veterans out there in my program. And when we would sit down in a circle like this, nobody would say anything. Nobody would say anything. And these are veterans who have the lived experience that I had on the battlefield, and then who come home and struggle a little bit. These veterans who just had a little bit of trouble adjusting to civilian life. And so nobody would say anything. So I would speak up and say, well, I know how you feel. I know how you feel. I know how you feel. And I know how you feel, the viewer. So I went to a program in Syracuse University called the EBV Boot Camp. It's an entrepreneurship boot camp for veterans. And that's where Lion Speaking Agency was born. There came a part in the program where you had to name your business and come up with a logo. And I thought to myself, what should I name this business? What is my business going to be about? And it is, well, the lion came up because when you're on stage, you're roaring, and it really does take the heart of a lion to get on stage and advocate for you, those individuals who aren't comfortable or don't know how to advocate for themselves. And that's what I do for my fellow veterans. I get on stage and I talk about very, 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 very important topics, things like mental health in our community, suicide in our community. It is October, National Disability Employment Awareness Month. I advocate for those individuals who are disabled, don't know how to advocate for themselves, teach a little bit about ADA law. And I get into some of those things on stage, and I'll always get my payoff when I come off stage and people, they have tears in their eyes and they say, man, David, you spoke for me on stage. My cousin's going through that. My brother's going through that. I'm currently going through that. So that's what the Lion is in Lion Speaking Agency here. It is getting on stage, roaring loud and proud, and continuing the fight just like I did in the military, but now I do it with the microphone instead of an M4. Get on stage, and Lion Speaking Agency is how I advocate for you, and you. Now let's get into my military service a little bit. I'm an old school scout, so I'm 19 Delta, and why I love being part of that lineage is a group of African American soldiers known as the Buffalo Soldiers, who were, I believe, the first group of African Americans who were able to fight in the military. And to be a part of that lineage, man, it is so special. It's also a part of the reason why I wrote my book, Calvary, available on Amazon, is to represent the African American service members who came before me and didn't have an opportunity to write their book and really couldn't express how they felt, what it means to be a part of the military, because once you're in, you realize that color does not matter at all. And just to make a better life for myself. When I was 17 years old, I was on those streets in Rochester, man. I used to hang out. I'm from Hudson and Avenue D. I grew up at a house, 843 Avenue D, man. And when I went to Franklin High School, and I used to hang around all the time on the block with my friends and things like that. And my dad didn't like that too much. My dad was really strict on me when I was a kid. Man, I had a 7 p.m. curfew and a 9 p.m. bedtime when I was 17 years old. And I thought, this just ain't gonna work. How the hell am I gonna get out of my dad's house, right? Probably what every teenage kid thinks, man, I wanna do what I wanna do. Well, Dad didn't think so. So one day on the school bus, man, we're not on the school bus, on the city bus. I was on East Main Street, man, and I saw this building. I pulled the cord on the bus, and I walked in, and I said, I want to join the Army, baby. And this was 2005, and the recruiter's jaws, it just dropped because, you know, what kid just walks in during the time of war in 2005 and says that they want to join the Army? So my recruiter, his name was Sergeant Soto. He had me take this practice ASVAB, and I was a horrible student because I was one of them no child left behind kids. Thanks, George Bush. Well, President Bush. You know, I was one of them no child left behind kids, man. So Franklin, they just kept passing me. And I was failing algebra every single year, that 9th grade algebra, man, because, you know, who's going to use a Pythagorean theorem, right? So I took this practice ASVAB, and I saw this math, and I thought to myself, you don't need math to shoot a gun, but you need it to get into the Army. So I took this practice ASVAB, didn't do too well on it, and I practiced some more, and eventually did well enough on the practice ASVAB to go to MEPS in Buffalo and take it. But had to tell the parents that I was going to join the Army. And I am a first generation soldier. So, and I'm my mom's oldest child, and I'm her only son. So you can imagine if you're a mom, you know, going to your mom and saying, hey, Mom, I'm going to join the Army. And my mom said, no, the hell you not. And I said, yeah, man, I'm going to join the Army, Mom. And of course, she cried. You know, my sisters, they were, I think, like 5, 3, and 14. I have, you know, shout out to my sisters, my twin sisters, my youngest sister, and one of my oldest little sister. Didn't know exactly what was going on at the time, but I told them I was going to join the Army, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And then I had to go tell my dad. I said, well, Dad, no more 9 p.m. bedtime because I'm going to be joining the Army. And then it came time for me to select my job, man. And I was a real wild kid, man. I was a real wild kid. So when I'm going through with my recruiter, I'm looking at these jobs. And my recruiter was a supply guy. And he said, I'm in the rear with the gear. And I looked at him. I said, man, I don't want to do no shit like that. And he looked like, really? And I said, sorry, Sergeant Soto. If you ever see this Lines In podcast, sorry about that, man. But he was like, I stay in the rear with the gear. I'm a 92 Yankee. I'm a supply guy. And I said, man, I need something with excitement. You know, I'm 17 years old. You know, I need something that's going to get the girls, right? You know, my 17-year-old brain. And so I'm looking at these different jobs, and he shows me this MOS, and there were guys coming out of the water in Humvees and chasing terrorists through the street, and they're rappelling from the walls, and they're running, singing cadence. And I said, what is that? And he said, well, that, my friend, is a 19 Delta Cavalry Scout. And I said, well, that's it. Sign me up. But before he said, let's do this MOS, he said, I want you to see everything that the Army has to offer. So he showed me one more MOS, and it was these dudes, you know, they were putting on makeup, and they had dresses on, and they were kind of dressed in drag and everything. And, you know, they were like having these dance contests. And I'm like, man, what is this? And he said, well, that, my friend, is the infantry, the queen of battle, queens. And I said, definitely don't want to do that. Definitely don't want to be no infantry. Don't want to be no infantry soldier. So I said, man, sign me up for the cavalry. And then he told me, he said, well, I'm glad you chose to be a scout because in basic training, the guys who don't make it through basic training, who can't do land nav, they become they get kicked out of the cavalry and they become infantry. And that is a real fact. You can tell your friends about that. So I joined the Army as a cavalry scout. And I go to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I met one of my good battle buddies there in basic, and I found out about these hills, heartbreak, misery, agony, and I found out all that the Army has to offer, and all that the world has to offer. In Rochester, everybody's Black or Puerto Rican. I found out that, hey, the world is not Black and Puerto Rican. It's more to the world than just that. And our drill sergeant gave us this really big speech. If you're a soldier, your drill sergeant probably gave you the light green, dark green speech as well. But here's how it goes. He looked around, he looked at us in the troop, and he said, look around. Some of you are light green, some of you are dark green. But it doesn't matter because in the Army, everybody's green. On the battlefield, when it comes time to fight, and when it comes down to it, doesn't matter what shade of green you are, you're going to have to help each other out. And these are your battle buddies. Get used to it now because the entire Army is like this. And it's one of the best lessons that I ever got from my Drill Sergeant Owens. I had 3 drill sergeants there, Drill Sergeant Burton, Drill Sergeant Andrade, Drill Sergeant Owens. So we go to, I get deployed, I get stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado. I meet my great friends there. I get assigned to the 361st Cavalry Regiment. Soon as we get there, we find out that we are going to Iraq. And not only are we going to Iraq, but our deployment is going to be extended from 12 months to 15 months. And of course, the parents didn't like that either. And yeah, man, I met my good friends out stationed out in Colorado Springs, man. Fell in love for the first time. I, had to get climatized because in Colorado Springs, the altitude is so, the air is thin. You need time to get climatized. And we go to Iraq, and Iraq was a beast. Our deployments were really bad. Our deployment was really, really, really rough. They came out with these new IEDs called EFPs, and they were just cutting through the trucks like butter. But I drove, I pride myself on being lead driver in my platoon, driving in the day and at night on the outskirts of southeast Baghdad and Salter City. And June 17th, 2007, I ended up getting shot by a sniper. I was just walking down the street, 20 years old. Pow, pow. Shot by a sniper. We got ambushed. They did something called pray and spray. As soon as I was down, 2 guys came up with AK-47s. They shot me again in my right leg, and they took off. And so the bullet, I got shot in my femoral artery. It shattered my femur, and it clipped my sciatic nerve. So I have a long-term disability from that. Can't move the toes of my left foot anymore. Had about 18 surgeries after the injury. Then the very next day, one of my best friends was shot and killed, man, and it just destroyed me. It destroyed me. So I had a lot of PTSD from that because one of the things that I speak about on stage, and I love to advocate for the veterans who aren't here anymore, as well as those who struggle, is dealing with that PTSD, dealing with that survivor's guilt. My PTSD is a little bit different than those of those veterans who were involved in blast attacks. Something that was strange about my deployment, as a lead driver, I never hit one IED, but I got shot by a sniper. What's the chances of that happening? But yeah, I got sent to a unit to heal called the Warrior Transition Unit. This unit was so bad that it made the New York Times because in this unit, you had a bunch of young guys like myself. I got shot when I was 20 years old. And I was in this unit with guys who gotten their legs blown off, guys who got their arms blown off by IEDs or mortar attacks. And man, we hit the bottle real heavy, and people there, man, started abusing their opioids. This was like during the beginning of the opioid crisis, and I was going through it as well. Like I said, we were getting hammered in Iraq at this time. So President Bush had initiated the troop surge, sent in 30,000 additional troops. And so we got hammered so hard, I needed a blood transfusion. And I was in Longstuhl, Germany. And this nurse came up and she was smiling, all happy. And she said, Private Kendrick, you are the first African-American veteran in this hospital to receive a blood transfusion with German blood. And so we were getting hammered so bad that the hospital ran out of American blood to give me. And I said, okay, that's pretty cool. And she said, well, no, that's not it, Private. We have a special name for you. And I was like, what else would you call me besides extremely handsome? And she was like, well, we all call you German chocolate here. And man, they just started cracking up in the hospital. All the nurses laughed. The guys in my room, they laughed as well. And it felt good to share a laugh with somebody at that time. But some of the things that I talk about from that experience, I was able to work with the Red Cross here in Georgia when it comes to blood donations, because a lot of African Americans don't give blood. And, sickle cell is something that is very rampant in the African American community. So I was able to use my lived experience going through that whole experience of getting injured, and little small things like that I try to leverage into speaking opportunities. So with my injury, man, like I said, in this unit, in the WTU, I saw guys taking their lives to do this, everything that we were dealing with at the time. And this was a time in the Army where you can go to sick call at 6 a.m. and come out with 30 Vicodin. Very dangerous time to be in the military. So I got out in 2010. I was going to stay in, but, being in this unit, I just saw the darkest parts of the Army. And I moved back home to Rochester for 2 years, and I struggled, man. I struggled getting a job because as a scout, those jobs, as I was disabled and I didn't know how to write a resume. So I got taken into this program, the Warrior Salute program out of Webster, New York, and slowly learning to become David again. So when it comes to my professional speaking now, I use all of my lived experience to advocate for others. So that experience that I had in the WTU dealing with opioid addiction, alcoholism, depression, PTSD, I leverage those lived experiences that I have, and I do my best to advocate and speak for you, for those individuals who are going through what I went through, but don't know exactly how advocate for themselves. And so I get on stage and I talk about a plethora of things, but I'm also a national advocate for NAMI. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and NAMI is in all 50 states, and you can visit www.nami.org to find out what the local NAMI branch is closest to you. But with NAMI, we provide free mental health resources to family members and caregivers of those individuals who are diagnosed with a mental health condition. And at NAMI, we always talk about our lived experience. And I became president of NAMI DeKalb here in Atlanta. I used to live in DeKalb County. And so I became president of NAMI DeKalb. And once again, I was using my voice, using my lived experience to advocate for others. And that's what I do here at Lion Speaking Agency. And it's what I do on stage, is use my lived experience. I find other people's stories and I have conversations with other people. And I just talk about, well, how did you get through that? Are you still going through this now? And I say, hey, well, I've been through this as well. And what I love about what I do, professional speaking, giving these keynotes and things like that, is I'll always have more material from people who say, man, I'm going through this right now. I've tried to go downtown to the state capitol and express to my local state representative that I need this. And it's just something that in my community, it's not getting highlighted. And I get to take those stories and do things like here in Atlanta, advocate for the 1013 bill, which is the 1013 is a medical emergency. It's if you call the police, it's like a mental health kind of arrest. And that's something that I've had to do for myself, because there were times when I didn't feel safe and really being afraid of myself, and just learning how to advocate for myself in that situation, learning how to, or teaching people how to advocate for their loved ones in the home, and letting them know that it's okay if you need to go to the hospital for your mental health. It's okay to talk to your doctors about things that you don't feel comfortable talking about, because that's how we all get better, right? We all get better by just opening our mouth. You don't need to be a keynote speaker and get on stage and roar loud and proud like I do, but it's doing those small things in the community with NAMI, teaching people how to advocate for themselves. And then when I could take some of those stories, turn them around, and speak on stage and advocate for those individuals who don't know how to do it for themselves. Now let's get into what you can expect from the Lions Den podcast. I have a lot of lived experience when it comes to mental health. So I'm going to bring a lot of professionals in who study the brain and figure out why do we feel suicidal? What drives us to suicide? When you go to the VA, or if you go to the doctor for a mental health reason, they always ask you, do you feel homicidal or do you feel suicidal? Well, what happens when that answer is yes? So I'm going to bring in experts who know how to answer those questions. Why do we feel sad? Why do we drink? Talk to addiction experts. Because one thing that I love to do as well as a professional speaker is let people know that there are other options out there besides AA. If you don't want to get up and say, hey, my name is David and I'm an alcoholic. There's programs through the VA you can go through. There's something called Smart Recovery that allows you to recover at your own pace. For some people, abstinence, it may not be the goal. It's, hey, I don't want to drink as much as I am right now, but I don't want to stop drinking. Well, hey, let's recover on your own time. So going to bring in some experts like that to help us understand the things that are going on here in between our ears, I'm sorry. So when that amygdala gets flooded with emotion and you feel like crashing out and going to your job and cussing out your boss and blowing up the building and setting it on fire, why do we feel like that? Let's rationalize our emotions here so we can make smarter decisions when we're full of anger, when we're full of rage. Because when that anger builds up, I always say you're like a bomb waiting to explode. And when you explode, the people, places, and things closest to you are the ones that are going to get hurt. So we're going to bring in some experts here, talk about our mind, talk about the brain. We're going to talk about mental health. What happens during a mental health arrest? If you have a loved one and they're going through a hard time at home and you need to call the police, how do the police interact with that individual that's going through a mental health crisis? Going to bring in some guests like that on the podcast, and other veterans as well, some people that I've served with, some people that are still currently serving, and just talk about the current state of the military, talk about all the crazy shit that our what is he now? Our Department of Warhead, Mr. Hegseth is doing, So we are in October, which is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So being a keynote speaker, some of the things that I talk about is my lived experience as an individual with a disability. Because what people always say, they say, well, he's extremely handsome, but he doesn't look disabled. And I get to advocate and help people realize that individuals with disabilities, there's no one look for individuals that have a disability. I have some experience here fighting for my case and fighting for others at the EEOC downtown in Atlanta, just trying to get what we deserved as individuals with disabilities. So I get on stage and I just like to advocate, especially for individuals with disabilities, because when I got home to Rochester, I worked for the Warrior Salute program, and I got to manage people who have developmental disabilities like Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism. And I learned all of the fascinating things, not only about those disabilities, but what these individuals with disabilities can do in the workforce. And I was a production supervisor, and I learned so much about my guys in the work or in the warehouse that had disabilities. So now I leverage that lived experience and I talk about that on stage along with a plethora of other things as well. So you can expect some other ADA advocates, individuals who have disabilities. We're going to highlight them as well on the Lions Den podcast and just talk about what it's like living with a disability. What challenges do individuals face with who live with a disability, things of that nature as well. Going to talk to a couple of addiction experts. First of all, why do we become addicted to our substance of choice? In the Army, I talk about this in my book. As soon as I graduated basic training, you get a drink put in your hand at 18 years old, and then you just go down the rabbit hole of alcohol. What's my favorite drink, and then how addiction progresses with the individual. So we had individuals who in the barracks started taking medication as prescribed, right? And then you go on and you need harder drugs. And then that's how you find people who in the barracks who do heroin and then coke and then there are other drugs of choice. And those things that lead to suicide or accidental overdoses. So I'm going to bring in some experts to talk about the brain, talk about why do we fall down into these rabbit holes as veterans and as civilians as well. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, what we're also going to get into in the Lions Den podcast here is just the art of professional speaking itself. What makes a speech good? What makes a professional speaker a professional speaker? What makes a keynote speech a keynote speech? Stage presence, things like that. We're going to talk about how long should you speak, question and answer sessions, the difference between being on the panel and giving a keynote speech. How do you find speeches? How do you apply for a call for presentation? And most importantly, for all keynote speakers, how do I get paid? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Thank you for being a guest on episode 1 of the Lions Den podcast. To find out more about me, your very handsome host and owner of Lion Speaking Agency, go visit me at www.dkendrickjr.com. Once again, that is www.dkendrickjr.com. On Facebook, I am David Kendrick, mental health advocate and professional speaker. And on Instagram, I am Lion Speaking Agency. Please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Thank you for coming to the Lions Den podcast. See you guys next time.